You know what really grinds my gears about humans? Commander Vkr'lak swirled his toxin-infused beverage, mandibles clicking in irritation. They weren't even supposed to be sentient yet. Our intelligence suggested they were still figuring out agriculture. Lieutenant Cathal snorted through his breathing apparatus. Intelligence? Is that what we're calling it now? The same intelligence that said Earth was defenseless? The very same. Vkr'lak drained his glass, the luminescent liquid briefly illuminating his scarred face from within. 10,000 ships. 10,000 ships, Cathal. Do you know how many made it back to the hegemony? 17, Cathal whispered. His tentacle fingers trembled slightly as he refilled both their glasses, and most of those were support vessels that never entered Earth's atmosphere. 17 out of 10,000, Vkr'lak repeated, his voice hollow. That's a 99.83% casualty rate. Not even the Silharine Purge was that catastrophic. The two alien veterans sat in silence at their corner table in the shattered carapace, a dingy outpost bar at the edge of civilized space. The establishment catered primarily to military personnel with stories they couldn't tell anywhere else. Or wouldn't. Or shouldn't. I was there, you know, Cathal finally said, eyes fixed on some distant point nobody else could see. Not in the initial wave, thank the Void Elder for that, but close enough to watch it all fall apart. Vkr'lak's compound eyes widened. You never told me that. Some things are hard to talk about, even after 30 cycles. A three-armed server drifted by, paused upon noticing Cathal's empty plate, then wisely moved along. The lieutenant had that 1,000-parsec stare that smart servers knew meant leave them alone or risk a violent flashback. Tell me, Vkr'lak said quietly, what was it really like? The official reports were sanitized. Cathal chittered, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a death rattle. Sanitized? They weren't just sanitized, Commander. They were pure fiction. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Do you want to know what really happened when the mighty hegemony decided to add one more insignificant blue world to its collection? Phase 1. Initial survey. Primitive bipeds, Survey Chief Shintala announced, gesturing at the holographic representation of Earth rotating before the fleet command. Mostly harmless, some rudimentary metallurgy and combustion technology, but nothing resembling spaceflight or energy weapons. Fleet Admiral Vkr'lak nodded approvingly. His reputation had been built on efficient conquests of pre-FTL civilizations. Life signs? Approximately 7 billion individuals, concentrated in these urban centers. Shintala highlighted various points on the globe. Their communication systems are primitive, mostly analog radio waves and a crude digital network. Defenses? Vkr'lak inquired, already mentally dividing up the planet's considerable water resources that would fetch a premium on the galactic market. Nothing worth mentioning, Shintala sniffed dismissively. Some chemical explosives, basic projectile weapons, and a smattering of nuclear devices that they've never actually deployed against each other. Their most advanced aircraft can barely achieve Mach 3. The assembled commanders chittered in amusement. Even their transport shuttles could outpace that. Any unified planetary government we need to subjugate first? Negative. They're divided into approximately 200 sovereign territories, most of which are suspicious of each other. No unified defense system, no orbital platforms, not even a proper early warning system. The species calls itself human, but they spend most of their time fighting amongst themselves over resources and ideologies. Fleet Admiral Vkr'lak's mouth parts formed into what passed for a smile in his species. Perfect. Standard conquest protocol, then. We'll be harvesting their oceans within a lunar cycle. Shall I prepare the usual intimidation broadcast? Communications Officer Drexvy inquired. Why bother? Vkr'lak waved a dismissive appendage. They'll have no context for who we are or the glory of the hegemony. Just deploy the atmospheric processors to make the air more comfortable for our ground forces and begin landing operations. We'll explain their new status as a subjugated world after we've seized their command centers. Shintala frowned slightly. Admiral, if I might suggest, our preliminary cultural scans indicate these humans have an unusual number of fictional narratives regarding extraterrestrial invasions. They might react unpredictably. Unpredictably? Vkr'lak scoffed. They throw sharpened metal at each other and consider it warfare. What exactly do you think they might do against our quantum disruptors and gravitational manipulators? Throw rocks? I merely suggest Your suggestion is noted, Survey Chief. Vkr'lak cut her off. But my 10,000 ships aren't here for a cultural exchange. Deploy the atmospheric processors, scramble their primitive communications, and prepare for ground assault. Phase 2. First Contact. The first atmospheric processor descended through Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday afternoon, its massive bulk briefly causing localized eclipse conditions over the Pacific Ocean, before it settled approximately 500 meters above the water's surface. Its primary emitters began ionizing the surrounding air, converting Earth's nitrogen-oxygen mixture to the methane-ammonia blend preferred by hegemony ground forces. Aboard the USS Nimitz, radar technician Jamal Washington stared at his screen in disbelief. "Sir, I'm tracking an object. It's big." Captain Reynolds leaned over his shoulder. "How big are we talking, Washington?" "About the size of Manhattan, sir." Reynolds blinked. "And it just appeared?" "Yes, sir. No approach vector. 1 second nothing. Next second. There it is." "Malfunction?" "Negative, sir. 3 separate systems are confirming, and we're getting visual now." The bridge crew fell silent as the feed from a reconnaissance aircraft appeared on the main screen. The structure, because it was clearly an artificial structure, hovered impossibly above the ocean surface, its design unlike anything human engineers had conceived. Angles that seemed to bend in impossible ways, surfaces that appeared simultaneously solid and permeable, and a faint purple glow emanating from what might have been propulsion systems. "Get me the Pentagon," Captain Reynolds said quietly, never taking his eyes off the screen. "And launch alert fighters. Let's maintain a safe distance, but I want eyes on that thing at all times." 20 minutes later, similar objects began appearing over major cities worldwide. In the Joint Chiefs Situation Room, General Haruki Tanaka watched as red dots appeared on the global map with alarming frequency. "Current count?" he asked. 117 objects, sir, all matching the same profile. They're positioning themselves over population centers on every continent. Any communication attempts? Nothing we can detect, sir. They're not responding to any broadcast frequencies, and they're causing significant disruption to civilian communications networks. Cell phones, internet, and satellite communications are experiencing failures within a 50-mile radius of each object. And we still have no idea what they are? The working theory is extraterrestrial, sir. General Tanaka, a career military man who had never given a moment's thought to the possibility of alien life, simply nodded. "I see. And these objects, are they doing anything besides hovering?" "Yes, sir. They appear to be releasing some kind of gas or particulate into the atmosphere. Initial readings suggest it's altering atmospheric composition locally." "Altering it how?" "Increasing methane and ammonia concentrations to levels that would be toxic to humans with prolonged exposure." General Tanaka's expression hardened. "That sounds like terraforming, or an attack." "Sir, the President is requesting your assessment and recommendation." Tanaka studied the map. The objects were still appearing, their numbers growing by the minute. "Tell the President that in the absence of any peaceful communication, and in light of what appears to be atmospheric weaponization, we must consider this an act of war. Recommend immediate military response with all available assets." Aboard the Hegemony command vessel Inevitable Conquest, Fleet Admiral Zogthrax was pleased with the initial deployment. "Atmospheric processors functioning at optimal efficiency," a technician reported. "Local composition already approaching breathable levels for our ground forces." "Excellent. Any response from the natives?" "Some primitive aircraft are circling our processors, maintaining distance. Their electronic emissions suggest they're scanning us and communicating with their command structures." "Predictable. Have they attempted weapons fire?" "Not yet, Admiral." "They're probably still in shock," Zogthrax said dismissively. "Prepare the first wave of ground forces. We'll establish beachheads near their largest population centers." Survey Chief Shintala cleared her throat nervously. "Admiral, our cultural analysis suggests that the humans have a concept they call aliens, which features prominently in their entertainment. Many of these narratives involve hostility and resistance to extraterrestrial presence." "Your point being?" "They might not react with the typical shock and awe of most pre-FTL species. They've been psychologically preparing for something like this, even if only fictionally." Zogthrax made an impatient gesture. "All the more reason to establish our dominance quickly. Deploy the ground forces." Near Edwards Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Maria Lopez watched the skies with binoculars. The massive alien structure hovering over Los Angeles was barely visible from this distance, but she could see the strange discoloration of the sky beneath it. a sickly yellow-green haze that was slowly spreading outward. Her radio crackled. "All units, this is Eagle 6. We have confirmation. Unknown craft are deploying smaller vessels. Repeat, we have dropships incoming. Maintain positions and await further orders." Maria lowered her binoculars, exchanging glances with the other members of her squadron. They'd been deployed to the perimeter of the base with little information beyond possible extraterrestrial presence. Possible had become definite. The distant sound of jet engines drew her attention skyward again. A formation of F-35s streaked overhead, heading toward Los Angeles. Her radio crackled again. "All units, be advised. POTUS has authorized defensive measures against unknown hostiles. Rules of engagement are now active. Consider all unidentified craft as potential threats." One of her squad mates, Davis, let out a low whistle. "Holy shit, we're really about to fight aliens." "Looks that way," Maria replied, checking her M4 carbine. A standard-issue rifle suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. In the distance, flashes of light appeared in the sky over Los Angeles. The F-35s had engaged. The first human counterattack caught the hegemony completely by surprise. Combat Information Officer Krexnar stared at his display in disbelief. "Admiral, the natives are attacking our atmospheric processors and dropships with kinetic weapons and primitive missiles." Zogthrax's posture stiffened. "Damage assessment?" "Minimal to the processors, but we've lost 7 dropships." 7. To their primitive weapons? "Yes, Admiral. Their aircraft are employing heat-seeking missiles that are locking onto our thermal signatures. Our dropships weren't running defensive countermeasures because we didn't anticipate resistance at this stage." "Activate all defensive systems immediately," Zogthrax ordered, "and launch fighter escorts for the remaining dropships." "There's more, Admiral," Krexnar continued. "The humans are targeting our atmospheric processors with larger missiles launched from the ground and sea vessels." "Impossible. Our intelligence indicated they had no weapons capable of damaging our processors." "They're using something called nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, sir. The yield is concerning." As if on cue, a blinding flash appeared on the main view screen. One of the atmospheric processors over a location identified as Moscow was enveloped in nuclear fire. The bridge fell silent. "Status of the processor?" Zogthrax asked quietly. "Heavily damaged, Admiral. Primary emitter array destroyed. Secondary systems failing. It's losing altitude and will likely impact the surface." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Zogthrax's features. "They're using nuclear weapons. On their own population centers?" "It appears so, Admiral." "These humans are more savage than we anticipated," Zogthrax muttered. "Deploy all fighter squadrons, shoot down any human aircraft or missiles, and accelerate the ground invasion. We need to seize their weapon control centers immediately." Phase 3. Escalation. "They expected us to roll over," Cthulhu explained, pouring another round of drinks. "That's the thing about the hegemony. They had conquered so many worlds that they forgot what it means to fight an enemy with nothing to lose." Vex'lak nodded slowly. "But nuclear weapons on their own cities? That seems extreme even for a desperate species." "Calculated sacrifice," Cthulhu replied. "The humans prioritized long-term survival over short-term casualties. When they realized what our atmospheric processors were doing, they made the decision that losing a few cities was preferable to losing their entire atmosphere." "And our ground forces?" Cthulhu's expression darkened. "That's where things really went to hell." The first hegemony ground forces to set foot on Earth's soil did so in what humans called Central Park in New York City. 50 elite shock troopers in full battle armor, armed with quantum disruptors and neural scramblers, emerged from their dropship expecting minimal resistance. What they encountered instead was a hastily assembled mix of police officers, National Guard members, and armed civilians who opened fire the moment the alien troops appeared. Squad leader Trazcon barely had time to activate his shield before a barrage of primitive bullets struck his position. Most bounced harmlessly off the energy barrier, but the sheer volume of fire was unexpected. "Defensive formation," he commanded. "Deploy neural scramblers and advance." His troops moved with the precision that had subjugated countless worlds, their weapons emitting the low-frequency pulses that should have incapacitated any sentient nervous system within range. The humans kept firing. "The neural scramblers are ineffective," his second-in-command reported. "Their neurological structure must be incompatible with our calibration." "Switch to disruptors, lethal settings," Trazcon ordered. The quantum disruptors hummed to life, sending visible distortions through the air as they fired. The effect was immediate and devastating. Human bodies came apart at the molecular level. disintegrating into component atoms with each hit. But still they came. For every human that fell, 3 more appeared, firing from buildings, from behind trees, from hastily established barricades. And they were learning. "Sir, they're adapting their tactics," his second warned. "They're staying outside the effective range of our disruptors, and concentrating fire on individual soldiers." A shock trooper to Trazkon's left suddenly collapsed, his armor breached at the joint between helmet and collar, a vulnerability that should not have been apparent to primitives with no knowledge of hegemony battle systems. "Fall back to the dropship," Trazkon ordered. "We need heavier weapons and reinforcements." But the dropship was no longer an option. As they turned, Trazkon saw their craft engulfed in flames, having been hit by something fired from a nearby building, a crude rocket-propelled explosive that had somehow pierced the ship's hull. "New plan," he said. "Secure that building. We'll establish a defensive position and call for extraction." They never made it to the building. As they moved across the open ground, the humans executed a coordinated attack from multiple angles. Bullets found the small gaps in alien armor with uncanny precision. Improvised explosives disrupted their shield generators. Within 20 minutes of landing on Earth, the elite shock troops of the mighty hegemony were reduced to 4 surviving soldiers pinned down behind a concrete structure, their advanced weapons nearly depleted of energy. "Command!" Trazkon transmitted desperately. "We require immediate extraction. The humans are—" A deafening explosion cut off his transmission, as something the humans called a Javelin anti-tank missile found its mark. Similar scenes played out across every landing zone. The hegemony forces, accustomed to cowing primitive species with their advanced technology, instead found themselves facing an enemy that, 1. had no centralized command structure to target, 2. was willing to absorb staggering casualties, 3. adapted to hegemony tactics with alarming speed, 4. employed asymmetric warfare techniques that nullified many technological advantages. In what would later be called the 6 Hours of Hell, by surviving hegemony forces, nearly 80% of the first wave of ground troops were wiped out before establishing any meaningful foothold. "Are we certain this data is accurate?" Zogthrax demanded, staring at the casualty reports scrolling across his display. "Verified from multiple sources, Admiral," his intelligence officer confirmed grimly. "We've lost contact with most of the first wave. The few survivors report that human resistance is ubiquitous and fanatical." "How is this possible? They're using projectile weapons against quantum technology." "Several factors appear to be at play, Admiral." Survey Chief Shintala interjected, her earlier caution now validated. "First, the humans have clearly sacrificed several major cities to destroy our atmospheric processors, demonstrating a willingness to accept casualties that we didn't anticipate. Second," she continued, "they appear to be coordinating globally, despite our disruption of their primary communication networks. They must have redundant systems we didn't detect. And third," she concluded reluctantly, "our cultural analysis suggests they have been psychologically preparing for this scenario for generations through their fiction. They're implementing tactics that mirror their entertainment narratives about alien invasions." "Fiction?" Zogthrax spat. "We're being defeated by fictional concepts?" "In a manner of speaking, yes," Shintala replied. "Many of their military leaders appear to be executing pre-existing contingency plans designed specifically for extraterrestrial invasion scenarios." "Preposterous." "Nevertheless, Admiral, the evidence is clear. The humans were ready for us in ways we never anticipated. And there's something else." "What?" Zogthrax demanded. "Our neural scramblers are ineffective against their nervous systems. It appears their brains operate on different frequencies than any species we've previously encountered, and they're remarkably resistant to pain and fear for biological organisms." Zogthrax paced the command deck, his pride warring with the tactical reality. "Deploy the second wave," he finally ordered. "Full combat configuration. No more shock troops. I want heavy assault units with area effect weapons, and target their military installations first." "Admiral," his second-in-command ventured cautiously, "perhaps we should withdraw and reassess. The resource cost of subduing these humans may exceed the value of their world." "Withdraw?" Zogthrax's voice became dangerously quiet. "The hegemony does not withdraw. We do not retreat. We conquer. Deploy the second wave." In the skies above Earth, the battle was equally chaotic. Hegemony fighters, designed for combat against similarly advanced species, found themselves struggling against swarms of numerically superior but technologically inferior human aircraft. The aliens had expected to establish air superiority within minutes. Instead, they found themselves engaged in a war of attrition they hadn't planned for. Fighter pilot Jexcor barrel-rolled his craft, barely avoiding another missile. These humans were persistent if nothing else. "How many is that now?" he asked his wingmate. "I count 17 missiles they've fired at you specifically," came the reply. "These humans really don't like you, Commander." "The feeling's mutual," Jexcor muttered, deploying countermeasures for what felt like the 100th time. "What's the status of our ground forces?" "Not good. Second wave is deploying, but first wave was nearly wiped out." Jexcor's compound eyes widened. "Wiped out? By primitives with projectile weapons?" "Apparently these primitives are particularly resourceful and numerous." A warning flashed across Jexcor's control panel. "I've got 3 more of their aircraft on my tail. How are they tracking us through our stealth systems?" "Unknown, but they seem to be adapting to our technology faster than anticipated." "This was supposed to be an easy conquest," Jexcor complained, executing another evasive maneuver. "In and out, subjugate the natives. Begin resource extraction." Nobody said anything about them fighting back like cornered razor beasts. If it's any consolation, Command is equally surprised. New orders are coming through. We're to provide close air support for the second wave landing zones. "Understood. Let's—" Jexcor's transmission cut off as his fighter erupted in flames, struck by a weapon he never saw coming. Phase 4, the turning point. "The second wave should have turned the tide," Cathul said, his voice hollow with memory. "Heavy assault units, planet crackers standing by in orbit, our best troops with our most devastating weapons. By all conventional military wisdom, Earth should have fallen within days." "But it didn't," Vex'zora prompted. "No," Cathul agreed, "because the hegemony made the worst mistake possible in warfare. They underestimated their enemy's resolve." The White House Situation Room had seen many crises, but none like this. The president, along with what remained of the Joint Chiefs and Cabinet, hunched over displays showing the global battlefield. The room was thick with tension, and the acrid smell of too much coffee. "What's the status of the nuclear response?" the president asked. 15 alien atmospheric processors destroyed," General Tanaka reported. "Unfortunately, Moscow, Beijing, New Delhi, and Los Angeles were lost in the process." The president closed his eyes briefly. "Casualties?" "Estimated 40 million, sir. But atmospheric contamination has been contained to those regions." "And the alien ground forces?" "The first wave was largely contained, sir. We've captured some of their technology and are already working on countermeasures. The second wave is more problematic. Heavier weapons, better armor. They're establishing beachheads in multiple locations." "What about their ships in orbit?" "That's our primary concern, Mr. President. Our remaining satellites show thousands of vessels. If they decide to simply bombard us from orbit, there's little we can do." The president nodded grimly. "So why haven't they?" An analyst spoke up. "We believe they want Earth relatively intact, sir. Probably for colonization or resource extraction. That's why they tried atmospheric processors first, changing our environment to suit them rather than destroying the planet outright." "Small comfort," the president muttered. "Options?" General Tanaka straightened. "Sir, we're coordinating with all remaining military forces worldwide. Russian and Chinese survivors have agreed to unified command structure, a first in history. European forces are intact and engaging alien beachheads in their territories. The Middle East is complicated, but mostly cooperating. And our secret weapon? Ready, sir, but we only get one shot at this." The president looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. The human race has faced extinction events before. Asteroids, ice ages, plagues, but never invaders who came with the explicit purpose of wiping us out. Today we fight not as Americans or Russians or Chinese, but as humans defending our home. He turned back to General Tanaka. "Execute Operation Trojan Horse." Fleet Admiral Zogthrax was growing increasingly frustrated. The second wave was establishing footholds, but at a cost that would have been unthinkable for a routine conquest. "Status report," he demanded. "We've secured landing zones on all continents, Admiral," his officer reported. "But casualties remain higher than projected. The humans are employing coordinated resistance and have begun using our own weapons against us." "Explain." "They're capturing our fallen troops' equipment and reverse engineering it with remarkable speed. We've confirmed reports of humans using modified quantum disruptors and even piloting a captured dropship." Zogthrax's anger was reaching dangerous levels. "This is unacceptable. Prepare the orbital bombardment platforms. We'll soften their major resistance centers before committing more ground forces." "Admiral," his communications officer interrupted. "We're receiving an unusual transmission from the surface. It's being broadcast on all frequencies, including our secure channels. How did they access our secure channels? Zogthrax demanded. Unknown, sir. The transmission appears to be a surrender message. That got Zogthrax's attention. Put it through. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a human in formal attire. This message is addressed to the commander of the alien forces currently invading Earth. The human began in a voice that had been hastily processed to match hegemony speech patterns. I am the President of the United States, speaking on behalf of Earth's Unified Defense Council. We recognize the technological superiority of your forces, and understand that continued resistance will only result in further loss of life. Therefore, we propose the following terms of surrender. All military resistance will cease immediately. In exchange, we request safe passage for a delegation of human representatives to discuss terms of our planet's integration into your empire. Zogthrax's mouth parts formed into a triumphant smile. About time these primitives recognized reality. Admiral, Shintala cautioned. This seems convenient. Of course it's convenient. Zogthrax dismissed her concern. They've realized the futility of resistance. This is the natural outcome when primitives face the might of the hegemony. The human on screen continued. To demonstrate our sincerity, we are sending a single unarmed vessel to your command ship, carrying our diplomatic delegation. This vessel will follow precisely the coordinates you provide and submit to any security measures you deem necessary. Accept their surrender, Zogthrax ordered. Transmit safe passage coordinates for their vessel to dock in Landing Bay 4. Triple the security detail and scan everything thoroughly. As his crew rushed to comply, Shintala approached the Admiral quietly. Sir, I must advise caution. The humans have demonstrated unexpected resourcefulness. This could be a deception. What could they possibly hope to accomplish? Zogthrax scoffed. Their primitive vessel will be surrounded by the might of the hegemony fleet. Any treachery will be met with immediate annihilation of their remaining population centers. I hope you're right, Admiral, Shintala said softly. For all our sakes. Lieutenant Cthulhu had been assigned to the security detail for the human delegation, a posting that would normally be beneath his rank, but one that every member of the crew was curious about. The first official contact with these surprisingly resilient humans. He watched through the reinforced viewport as the human vessel, a surprisingly elegant white craft bearing the inscription NASA, docked in the cavernous landing bay. It seemed almost toy-like compared to the hegemony ships surrounding it. All personnel stand ready, his commander ordered. The delegation will disembark momentarily. The human craft's airlock cycled open, and 6 figures emerged. They wore simple white garments that had been checked and approved by the security protocols. No weapons, no technology beyond simple translation devices. They were escorted to the command deck under heavy guard, their alien physiology the subject of much fascination among the crew. Bipedal, symmetrical, with exposed skin and what appeared to be artificial coverings rather than natural armor. Primitive indeed, yet Cthulhu couldn't shake an uneasy feeling as he watched them. There was something in their stance, in the way they surveyed their surroundings. Not fear, not awe, but something almost like anticipation. On the command deck, Zogthrax awaited the delegation with the full pomp of his station. The humans were brought before him, surrounded by guards with weapons ready. I am Fleet Admiral Zogthrax of the Hegemony, he announced. You will now formally surrender your world to our control. The lead human stepped forward. I am Special Envoy Thomas Mitchell. Before we proceed with formal surrender, my delegation requests clarification on the terms of our planet's integration into your empire. There are no terms, Zogthrax replied dismissively. Your world is now a resource extraction colony of the hegemony. Your species will be relocated to designated habitation zones, while we harvest your oceans and mineral deposits. The human showed no reaction. I see. And what guarantees can you provide for the safety of the human population? Those who cooperate will be permitted to live as a labor force. Those who resist will be eliminated. That is the way of the hegemony. The human nodded slowly. In that case, Admiral, I'm afraid we cannot surrender after all. Zogthrax's anger flared. You have no choice in the matter. Your delegation is now hostage, and your world faces orbital bombardment if you do not comply. About that, the human said calmly. We're not actually a delegation. Alarm bells began blaring throughout the command ship. Admiral, the security chief shouted. The human vessel! It's emitting massive energy readings! Zogthrax whirled back to the human. What have you done? Thomas Mitchell smiled. We brought you a gift, Admiral. the culmination of our primitive nuclear technology, currently set to detonate in approximately 30 seconds. The security forces raised their weapons, but the human continued speaking without concern. Oh, and we're not actually humans. We're androids designed to look human. Our real gift isn't just the bomb. It's the computer virus that's currently spreading through your fleet's connected systems. Impossible, Vkr'lak sputtered. Our cybersecurity was designed to defend against enemies at your technological level, Mitchell finished for him. Not against primitives with entirely different programming architecture. Your neural interfaces make you especially vulnerable. The alarms grew more insistent. Admiral, the security chief called out desperately. The virus has locked out our systems. We can't eject the human vessel, and it's counting down to detonation. Computer systems are failing ship-wide. For the first time in his career, Vkr'lak knew true fear. Dispatch alert to all ships, he ordered. Maintain distance from the command vessel. Prepare to... The rest of his order was never given. The human vessel detonated with a force that tore through the mighty hegemony command ship like paper. The explosion was not just nuclear. It was enhanced with something the humans called antimatter, a technology the hegemony had considered purely theoretical. The destruction of the command ship created a chain reaction. With the fleet's central coordination gone and critical systems compromised by the virus, chaos ensued. Ships lost navigational control, some colliding with others, some firing weapons systems at phantom targets generated by the virus. And in orbit above Earth, thousands of smaller human craft suddenly emerged from hidden positions on the dark side of the moon and among the asteroid belt. Craft that had been deemed too primitive to be a threat now swarmed the disorganized hegemony fleet, targeting engines and weapon systems with precision that suggested they had studied alien technology very carefully during the ground invasion. Phase 5, the rout. That was the turning point, Cathul said, his drink forgotten. The humans had sacrificed their most advanced space vessel, packed it with their most devastating weapons, and piloted it with artificial beings created solely for that suicide mission. Vex'lak shook his head in disbelief. But how did they infect our systems so easily? Turns out, Cathul explained, the hegemony had a blind spot. All our cybersecurity was designed to defend against attacks from technological paradigms similar to our own. The humans used programming languages and architecture so primitive and different that our systems didn't recognize them as threats until it was too late. And after the command ship was destroyed? Total chaos. No central coordination, compromised navigation, and weapons systems. And suddenly thousands of human ships appearing from hiding places throughout their solar system. Ships we'd dismissed as non-threats because they didn't have FTL capability. Cathul's gaze grew distant again. What followed was the most one-sided battle I've ever witnessed, but not in the way anyone expected. The mighty hegemony fleet, 10,000 ships strong, was reduced to scattered, panicking clusters. Those that could still navigate attempted emergency FTL jumps, often with catastrophic results due to hasty calculations. Those that couldn't were systematically disabled by the human forces. And you? How did you survive? Vex'lak asked quietly. I was aboard a support vessel on the fleet's periphery. We hadn't integrated fully with the main command network yet, so the virus affected us less severely. Our captain made the only sensible decision: immediate retreat. Was pursuit attempted? Cathul chittered darkly. No need. The humans didn't have FTL capability yet, but they made sure we knew we weren't welcome back. As we fled, they broadcast a message to all surviving hegemony vessels on our own communication channels. What did it say? It was simple, just 3 sentences. Earth is not yours to take. Return, and none of you will survive. Spread the word. EPL. You know, humans are weird. Like, super weird, Vkr'lak said, his 4 compound eyes blinking in asynchronous patterns that indicated deep contemplation to his species. To everyone else in the galactic community, it just looked like he was having a minor seizure. Define weird, replied Captain Therex, her scaled fingers tapping impatiently against the metal conference table. The gathering of species was about to commence in 20 minutes, and as usual, she was stuck babysitting the newest diplomatic attaché from the Florbidian collective. They've only been part of the Galactic Alliance for 3 standard cycles. Everyone's weird at first. Vkr'lak's exoskeleton shifted with an audible creak, the Florbidian equivalent of an uncomfortable shrug. No, I mean properly weird. Haven't you noticed? In every single diplomatic meeting, summit, conference, or casual gathering, they always, and I mean always, Sit at the back of the room. Huh. Therex tilted her head, her cranial ridges catching the light. Now that you mention it. See? And nobody talks about it. Vkr'lak's voice rose to a chittering pitch that made Therex wince. It's like some unspoken rule. First to arrive, last to leave, and always taking the seats furthest from whatever's happening. Maybe they're just shy? Suggested Therex, though she didn't believe it herself. The humans she'd met were many things. Resourceful, unpredictable, occasionally terrifying, but shy wasn't one of them. The same species that challenged the Vorgak's champion to a drinking contest within 15 minutes of first contact. The ones who have already established trade routes in sectors even the Vkr'laks fear to enter? Shy? Vkr'lak's mandibles clicked in the equivalent of a scoff. There's something else going on. Therex was about to dismiss the conversation entirely when the doors to the conference room slid open, and right on cue, a delegation of humans strolled in. As if to prove Vkr'lak's point spectacularly, they nodded politely to everyone, exchanged a few pleasant greetings, and then, like a choreographed dance, made their way directly to the furthest seats from the central podium. See? Hissed Vkr'lak triumphantly. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Therex muttered automatically, recycling a phrase she'd learned from a human diplomat that seemed to shut down uncomfortable lines of questioning. Let's find out, said Vkr'lak, suddenly standing. What? No, sit down, you overgrown beetle. But it was too late. Vkr'lak was already making his way toward the human delegation, his multi-jointed legs carrying him across the room with alarming speed. Therex considered her options, sighed heavily, and followed. This was, after all, technically part of her job description, preventing interspecies incidents before they happened. By the time she caught up, Vkr'lak was already mid-question. Just wondering why your species always chooses to sit at the back during gatherings. Is it a cultural thing? Religious observance? Biological necessity? The tallest of the humans, a male with dark curly hair and a neatly trimmed beard, blinked in surprise before breaking into a warm smile. His name tag read Ambassador Jackson. Oh, that? It's nothing official, Jackson replied with a casual wave of his hand. Just old habits from school, I guess. Therex and Vkr'lak exchanged confused glances. School? Vkr'lak's translator struggled briefly with the concept. Your juvenile education centers? Yeah, nodded a shorter human with copper-colored hair tied back in an intricate braid. Her tag identified her as Dr. Novak, xenoanthropologist. Back row's always been prime real estate, she continued with a grin. You can see everything happening. Nobody's watching over your shoulder, and you can sneak out early if things get boring. Or sneak in late, added a third human, this one with skin several shades darker than his companions, and close-cropped silvery hair despite his youthful appearance. His tag read Lieutenant Okonkwo, Security Liaison. The back row is tactically advantageous in numerous situations, Okonkwo explained, suddenly serious. Clear sight lines, multiple exit routes, minimal exposure. What he means, interrupted Jackson with a pointed look at his colleague, is that it's just a human thing, nothing to worry about. But Therex had been a diplomat for over 40 cycles, and she recognized deflection when she heard it. There was something the humans weren't saying. Is this why your species requested structural modifications to the central chamber for the Summit of Worlds next cycle? She asked carefully. A brief, almost imperceptible look passed between the humans, so quick that if Therex hadn't been watching for it, she would have missed it entirely. Just standard accessibility accommodations, Dr. Novak said smoothly. Nothing special. Before Therex could press further, the chamber's announcement system chimed, signaling 5 minutes until the gathering would commence. We should take our seats, Ambassador Jackson said pleasantly. Wouldn't want to delay proceedings. As Therex reluctantly guided Vkr'lak back to their assigned positions near the front, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something significant. The humans were hiding something about why they always insisted on sitting at the back of every room in the galaxy, and she was going to find out what it was. I think you're overreacting, High General Zilnax rumbled, his massive frame barely contained by the reinforced chair designed specifically for his species. The Drakari were the acknowledged powerhouses of the Alliance, 9 feet of muscle, scale, and barely restrained aggression packed into every individual. Their reputation as the galaxy's strongest warriors was well earned through centuries of dominance in both ceremonial contests and actual conflicts. With all due respect, General, I'm not, Therex insisted, tapping through the holographic displays hovering between them. Look at the data. In every recorded meeting for the past 3 cycles, human representatives positioned themselves at the furthest possible distance from the focal point while maintaining clear sightlines to all exits. So they're cautious, prudent even. For a species so physically fragile, it's sensible. Therex frowned. Humans aren't that fragile. Compared to my kind? Zilnax let out a rumbling sound that passed for laughter among the Drakari. They're practically made of tissue paper. No natural armor, dull teeth, blunt claws, minimal strength. It's remarkable they survived long enough to develop spaceflight. And yet, Therex countered, they've established themselves in sectors that even your scout ships avoid. The fringe territories, the Vorpal Expanse. They've got mining operations and colonies throughout, with minimal casualties. That gave Zilnax pause. His inner eyelids flickered, a sign of grudging contemplation among his kind. There's also the matter of the structural modifications they've requested. Therex continued, bringing up the architectural plans. Look at these specifications. Additional support pillars, reinforced ceiling joists, expanded emergency exits, all for accessibility purposes. Perhaps their physiology requires. They're virtually identical in build to the Terrasi, who require no such accommodations. Therex cut in. And even more curious, they've offered to fund these modifications themselves, at considerable expense. The general's head tilted slightly. That is, unusual. Precisely. And when directly questioned about their seating preferences, they deflect with humor or vague references to their educational customs. There's a pattern here, General. I believe it may relate to security concerns they haven't shared with the Alliance. Zilnax was quiet for a long moment, his massive claws tapping thoughtfully against the table. Finally he spoke. Your concerns are noted, Captain. But unless you have concrete evidence that the humans pose a threat to Alliance security, this remains merely a cultural curiosity. I'm not suggesting they're a threat, Therex clarified quickly. But I do believe they know something the rest of us don't. Something about the conference rooms, or perhaps about gathering in general, and given the upcoming summit, which they've been instrumental in organizing, Zilnax interrupted. Strange behavior for a species planning something nefarious, wouldn't you agree? Therex's scales flushed slightly with frustration. I'm not implying nefarious intent, merely that there's information being withheld. The general rose to his full height, towering over Therex. Then I suggest you find that information through appropriate diplomatic channels, Captain, not through speculation and data mining. As Zilnax lumbered toward the exit, he paused. And Therex, remember that curiosity is a valuable trait in a diplomat, until it becomes obsession. The door hissed shut behind him, leaving Therex alone with her data displays and growing suspicions. Don't turn around, Dr. Novak murmured, her smile firmly in place despite the tension in her voice. But we're being watched. Again. Ambassador Jackson maintained his relaxed posture in the station's recreational area, casually sipping his synthesized coffee substitute. Captain Therex? And her new best friend, the bug guy. Vkr'lak, supplied Lieutenant Okonkwo without looking up from his datapad. Florbidian diplomatic attaché, newly assigned. His species is known for obsessive information gathering and pattern recognition. Problematic combination. They've been following us for 3 days, Novak continued, still smiling and nodding as if they were having a delightful conversation. Subtle but persistent. It was a reasonable inquiry, Okonkwo noted. Our behavioral patterns are statistically anomalous compared to other Alliance species. Thank you, Mr. Walking Calculator. Novak rolled her eyes. The point is they're getting suspicious and the summit is in 14 days. If they start poking around the modifications we've requested, they won't find anything suspicious, Jackson cut in firmly. The plans are sound, the explanation's reasonable. Everything is proceeding according to protocol. Protocol hasn't accounted for a scaled Sherlock Holmes and her insect Watson, Novak muttered. I'll handle it, Jackson decided, standing. Diplomatic distraction. You two continue preparations. Before his colleagues could object, Jackson turned and walked directly toward the table where Therex and Vkr'lak were pretending not to be watching them. Their surprise at his approach was almost comical. Vkr'lak's compound eyes widened to maximum aperture, and Therex nearly choked on whatever gelatinous substance passed for refreshment in her culture. Captain Therex, Attaché Vkr'lak. Jackson greeted them with genuine warmth. What a pleasure to encounter you outside of formal proceedings. May I join you? Their stammered acceptances were all the invitation he needed. Settling into a chair that was clearly designed for a different anatomical structure, Jackson maintained his easy smile. I couldn't help but notice your interest in our delegation, he said, deciding that directness might be the best approach. Is there perhaps something I can help clarify? Any questions about Earth or humans that might satisfy your curiosity? Therex recovered first, her professional diplomat's mask sliding smoothly back into place. Actually, Ambassador, we were just discussing some of the unique contributions humans have made to Alliance protocols in such a short time. Your species' emphasis on, what do you call it? Emergency preparedness. Ah, Jackson nodded, not missing the implied question. Yes, we do have a certain fondness for contingency planning. Probably stems from our evolutionary history as prey animals before we developed tools and became apex predators. Prey animals? Vkr'lak's translator squeaked with surprise. But your hunting capabilities are relatively recent, evolutionarily speaking, Jackson explained. For most of our development, we were vulnerable to larger predators. It instilled a certain awareness of our surroundings that persists even now. Fascinating, Therex said, in a tone that suggested she found it suspicious rather than interesting. And does this awareness explain your species' preference for posterior seating arrangements during gatherings? Jackson couldn't help but laugh. You really are fixated on that, aren't you? Look, it's nothing sinister. Back on Earth, in our educational facilities, the troublemakers always sat at the back. It became something of a cultural constant. The cool kids, the rebels, back row. And you were all cool kids? Vkr'lak attempted the idiom with visible confusion. Some of us, Jackson winked. Others just picked up the habit. Once you've experienced the freedom of the back row, it's hard to give up. Therex leaned forward slightly. And the structural modifications requested for the summit chamber? Are those also habits you've picked up? Jackson maintained his easy smile, though inwardly he cursed the captain's persistence. Simple safety precautions. Our risk assessment team identified several areas that didn't meet Earth's construction standards for public gathering spaces. We offered to fund the upgrades as a gesture of goodwill. Very generous, Therex noted dryly. We're a generous people, Jackson replied, standing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a meeting with the Arcturan delegation about their menu requirements. Those folks can eat, let me tell you. As he walked away, Jackson could feel their eyes on his back. The distraction had worked temporarily, but it was clear that Captain Therex wasn't going to let this go easily. They were running out of time. They're hiding something, Therex insisted, pacing the length of Vkr'lak's office. Every inquiry is met with deflection, humor, or conveniently timed interruptions. This goes beyond cultural peculiarities. The High General watched her with growing concern. Captain, your fixation on this matter is becoming noticeable. The human delegation has filed a formal complaint about harassment. Therex stopped dead. They what? Ambassador Jackson was quite diplomatic about it, Vkr'lak continued, bringing up a holographic document. He suggested that perhaps cultural misunderstandings had led to some uncomfortable interactions, and requested that surveillance of their delegation cease. It wasn't surveillance, it was observation, Therex protested. And I've discovered patterns that cannot be dismissed. Vkr'lak sighed, a sound like distant thunder. Very well. Present your evidence, and I will consider it. Therex quickly activated her data compilation, filling the room with hovering displays. First, the seating arrangements. Not just a preference, but a requirement. In 78 different diplomatic functions, humans have requested amendments to standard protocols to ensure their positioning at maximum distance from podiums, stages, or central gathering points. Perhaps they... Second, she continued, not allowing interruption. The architectural modifications. I consulted with 3 independent structural engineers. The specifications requested go far beyond safety or accessibility concerns. They're essentially creating reinforced zones capable of withstanding catastrophic structural failures. Vkr'lak's scales shifted slightly, the Drakari equivalent of raised eyebrows. Third, equipment requisitions. Another display expanded. The human delegation has acquired 17 different scanning devices capable of detecting structural integrity issues, atmospheric anomalies, and subsonic vibrations, ostensibly for cultural research. That is unusual, Vkr'lak admitted. And finally, Therex said, bringing up security footage, this. The recording showed Lieutenant Okonkwo in an apparently empty corridor, moving quickly. He paused at a junction, looked around, then pressed his palm against a seemingly solid wall. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a cavity filled with equipment. He removed what appeared to be a small device, activated it, and studied the readout with intense concentration before quickly replacing everything and continuing on his way. This was taken yesterday in Section 47B, supposedly a maintenance corridor. Upon investigation, I found no record of that access panel in any station schematics. Zilnak's massive form straightened, all traces of dismissiveness gone. What was the device? Unknown, Therex admitted. But Section 47B runs directly beneath the main conference chamber where the summit will be held. The High General was silent for a long moment, his reptilian features unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice low and serious. You've made your case, Captain. Authorization granted for a covert investigation team. Minimal personnel, absolute discretion. If the humans are planning something that threatens Alliance security. I don't believe they intend harm, Therex interrupted, surprising herself with the admission. Their behavior doesn't match known patterns for sabotage or aggression. This feels different, like they're preparing for something. Preparing for what? Therex shook her head. That's what we need to find out. The command center was silent save for the soft hum of equipment and the occasional murmur between technicians. Therex stood with her small team, Vkr'lak, 2 Drakari security specialists, and a Malorian tech expert, watching the screens that displayed multiple angles of the bustling conference chamber. The Summit of Worlds was entering its 3rd hour, with representatives from 47 species engaged in discussions about resource sharing, territorial boundaries, and interspecies judicial protocols. The human delegation, true to form, had positioned themselves at the furthest point from the central podium, seated against the back wall with clear views of all exits. Anything? Therex asked quietly. The Malorian, a gelatinous being named X-Lee who existed partially in dimensions humans couldn't perceive, burbled softly before responding. Scanning equipment functioning normally. All human delegates are carrying multiple electronic devices, but nothing outside parameters for diplomatic personnel. The structural modifications? Completed according to specifications, reported one of the Drakari, a stocky female named Korva. Additional support pillars installed, ceiling reinforcements in place, emergency exits expanded. Nothing overtly suspicious, though as you noted, the reinforcement level seems excessive for standard safety protocols. Vkr'lak's mandibles clicked nervously. Maybe we're overthinking this. Perhaps humans simply have a cultural aversion to being at the center of attention during formal proceedings? Therex shook her head. That doesn't explain the hidden scanning equipment, the architectural modifications, or... She broke off suddenly, staring at one of the monitors. What's Ambassador Jackson doing? All eyes turned to the screen showing the human delegation. Jackson appeared to be casually checking his wrist device, standard behavior for most species, but there was an intensity to his focus that seemed out of place. Magnify and enhance, Therex ordered. The image zoomed in, revealing that Jackson wasn't checking the time or messages. The device displayed what appeared to be a complex waveform pattern that fluctuated in real time. That's a seismic monitor, Korva said suddenly. Military grade. Therex felt her scales tighten with alarm. Seismic? We're on a space station. There's no... A shrill alarm suddenly blared from Slee's equipment. The Malorian's translucent form pulsed with agitation. Energy surge detected. Massive distortion in subspace fields surrounding the station. Pattern matches. The Malorian's speech devolved into untranslatable bubbling sounds of panic. Matches what? Therex demanded. It was Vkr'lak who answered, his compound eyes fixed on a different display. Wormhole formation, unauthorized and unscheduled. Source appears to be directly beneath the main conference chamber. Evacuation protocols now, Therex barked, reaching for the emergency communication systems. But before she could activate the alarm, the screens showing the conference chamber revealed a startling development. The human delegation was already moving, not in panic, but with practiced efficiency. Ambassador Jackson had stood and was calmly raising his hand for attention, while Dr. Novak and Lieutenant Okonkwo were discreetly moving toward the emergency exits they'd insisted on expanding. What are they? Therex began, but her question was cut short as the entire station shuddered violently. On screen, chaos erupted in the conference chamber. Delegates cried out in alarm as the floor buckled slightly. And then, to Therex's absolute astonishment, every single human in the room dropped to the floor and rolled under their seats in near-perfect synchronization. Seconds later, the ceiling directly above the central podium cracked, sending debris raining down precisely where the dignitaries had been gathered moments before. But the central area was now empty, because Ambassador Jackson had somehow convinced everyone to move toward the back of the room, where the humans had been sitting all along. They knew, Therex whispered. Somehow they knew this was coming. 6 hours later, the emergency was contained. The unexpected subspace rupture, later determined to be caused by an ancient dormant wormhole generator buried in the asteroid the station had been built upon, had been stabilized by Alliance engineers. Remarkably, there had been no casualties, though the main conference chamber had suffered significant structural damage. The quick actions of the human delegation were being hailed across the station as heroic. Their inexplicable preparedness had saved countless lives, as they had managed to guide most delegates away from the danger zone before the worst of the collapse. Vkr'lak found Ambassador Jackson in the medical wing, where he was visiting injured delegates. When he saw her approaching, he excused himself and met her in the corridor. "Captain," he greeted her, his usual easy smile replaced by a weary but genuine expression. "I suppose you have questions?" "Several thousand," Vkr'lak confirmed. "But let's start with the obvious one. How did you know?" Jackson sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Let's walk." They moved through the quieter sections of the station, away from the bustle of emergency personnel and concerned diplomats. When they reached an observation deck overlooking the swirling gases of the nebula beyond, Jackson finally spoke. "Humans have a sensitivity that other species don't seem to share," he began carefully. "We can feel when things are about to go wrong." Vkr'lak's scales rippled with skepticism. "You expect me to believe humans are precognitive? That would have been mentioned in your species profile." "Not precognition," Jackson clarified quickly. "Nothing so dramatic. It's more a culmination of subtle awareness. Micro-vibrations in structures, shifts in air pressure, subliminal sounds, movement patterns in crowds. Our nervous systems process these cues unconsciously, creating what we call a bad feeling or instinct. That doesn't explain how you predicted a subspace rupture." "We didn't," Jackson admitted. "Not specifically. But our science vessels detected unusual energy patterns in this sector 3 months ago. Patterns consistent with dormant wormhole technology. When this station was chosen for the summit, our analysts identified a non-zero probability of destabilization." "And you didn't share this information because—" Jackson hesitated. "Previous attempts to explain our concerns to other species have been met with dismissal or offense. We've been called paranoid, superstitious, or accused of attempting to manipulate diplomatic proceedings. So instead, you requested structural modifications, installed hidden monitoring equipment, and positioned yourselves to minimize casualties if something went wrong," Vkr'lak summarized. "While hoping nothing would," Jackson added. "We're not alarmists, Captain. We just prepare for possibilities others dismiss." Vkr'lak was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "And the back row seating preference? That's related?" For the first time, Jackson laughed genuinely. "That part was actually true. It started as a habit from our educational systems. But over time we realized it had tactical advantages. Better sightlines, proximity to exits, maximum distance from potential danger zones. It became standard protocol for human diplomatic personnel." So when Vkr'lak asked, "We told a partial truth," Jackson nodded. "It's easier than explaining that humans have evolved to be constantly, subconsciously expecting disaster at any moment." Vkr'lak considered this, her diplomatic training helping her see the situation from the human's perspective. "Your species must find the rest of us remarkably oblivious." "Not oblivious," Jackson corrected gently. "Just differently focused. Most Alliance species evolved as apex predators or in stable environments. You never needed the same hyper-awareness of potential threats that shaped human development." "High General Zilnax called you prey animals," Vkr'lak recalled. He meant it dismissively, but it's partly true," Jackson finished. "And it's why we're always watching, always planning for the worst while hoping for the best. It's not a superpower, Captain. Sometimes it's a burden." Vkr'lak looked out at the nebula, its swirling patterns both beautiful and chaotic. "I think perhaps the Alliance has underestimated your species, Ambassador." Jackson smiled faintly. "Most do at first. It's actually to our advantage. Because no one suspects the species sitting quietly in the back row?" "Exactly." Jackson turned to face her directly. "So, what happens now, Captain? Do we face censure for unauthorized equipment? For withholding information about potential risks?" Vkr'lak considered her options, knowing her report would significantly impact Human-Alliance relations moving forward. Finally, she straightened. Decision made. "My report will recommend that human risk assessment protocols be formally integrated into Alliance security procedures," she said, "and that your species be consulted on all future structural designs for diplomatic facilities." Jackson's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's Unexpected. Additionally, Therex continued, I'll be requesting assignment as permanent liaison to Earth's diplomatic corps. I believe there's much our peoples can learn from each other. Captain Therex, Jackson said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. I think this is the beginning of a fascinating partnership. As Therex carefully clasped his comparatively fragile hand, she couldn't help but wonder what other surprises these strange, watchful creatures might have in store for the galaxy. The summit reconvened 3 days later in an alternative chamber. The proceedings had been altered to incorporate several human suggestions regarding emergency procedures and structural safety, suggestions that were now being taken very seriously indeed. But the most notable change was the seating arrangement. Though no formal announcement had been made, delegates from various species had quietly rearranged themselves, with many choosing positions toward the back of the chamber near exits and with clear sightlines to all potential danger zones. High General Zilnax found himself sitting beside Lieutenant Okonkwo, the human security liaison. The massive Drakari shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced chair, trying to appear casual. Is this position acceptable? He rumbled quietly. Okonkwo surveyed the room briefly before nodding. Good sightlines. Proximity to both primary and secondary exits. Reinforced section of flooring. Yes, this is a tactical seating choice, General. Zilnax's scales flushed slightly with what might have been pride. Your species' awareness of potential threats is admirable, he admitted grudgingly. On the battlefield, such vigilance would be considered a warrior's virtue. Thank you, Okonkwo replied simply, though we prefer to avoid battlefields when possible. Yet you prepare for them constantly, Zilnax observed. Even in peaceful diplomatic gatherings. Especially then, the human corrected. Peace requires more vigilance than war, not less. The Drakari considered this novel concept, finding unexpected wisdom in it. My ancestors had a saying, the strongest warrior sees the strike before it is thrown. Okonkwo smiled. On Earth we say better safe than sorry. Less poetic, Zilnax grunted, but accurate. As the session began, the general found himself unconsciously scanning the chamber for potential hazards, exit routes, and structural weaknesses, just as he would on a battlefield. For the first time, he understood the human's perspective. What he had dismissed as paranoia or weakness was actually a different kind of strength. The galaxy's strongest species had much to learn from the cautious creatures who always sat at the back, quietly watching and waiting, not in fear, but in readiness. Across the chamber, Captain Therex caught his eye and nodded slightly. They shared a new understanding. In a universe full of unknown dangers, perhaps the most valuable allies were those who expected the unexpected, and always knew where the exits were. The end. You're telling me they regularly go unconscious